Well, let's turn in our Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel 18. I'll send out an email about this later this afternoon, but the young families group that's been meeting at our house once a month, our next study, and it may potentially be the last one for the year as we're starting to get into the holiday season, but will be 2 weeks from today. So let's see, that'd be the 16th. So November 16th for the next young family study. 1 Samuel chapter 18. I've been teaching in the middle school class this quarter, and so we're going through the first section of the United Kingdom. The auditorium class is now in part 2 there, but we've been talking about David and Jonathan lately, and so I wanted to say some things to all of us, but especially to our young folks, things that I wasn't quite able to get to in class, but things I might be helpful for all of us to think about. So read with me chapter 18 and verse 1. Now it came about when David had finished speaking to Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. I love that language. The souls of these two men were knit together. Now, listen, I'm not a knitter, and you're probably not surprised to hear me tell you that. But I know what knitting is. I understand the concept. And I love that image, right? That their souls were knit together. They were woven together. Let's go to chapter 20. Look at verse 17. Chapter 20, verse 17. Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own life. There is such a closeness in the relationship between David and Jonathan that they are truly friends. They are friends in the deepest and in the most full sense of the word. They have a friendship that the Bible celebrates, a friendship that God puts before us and says, this is what true friendship looks like. And I think that maybe God gives us the story of David and Jonathan because of all the things that David is facing in his life, right? You remember the story about Jonathan's father, Saul, chasing David and wanting to kill David, and we're going to see some of those things in our lesson this morning. But at a time in David's life when he needed a true friend, God gave him one. God gave him the best of friends. You know, in our world today, we have a very, very shallow view of friendship, don't we? You know, so much of our friendship interaction is digital now. It's all done online. It's done through social media, and we talk about how many followers and how many friends we have on various social media platforms. Listen, that is not the kind of relationship that David and Jonathan had. They had a relationship that was face to face, day to day, close to close interaction. They had a bond that I would suspect very few people in our world today share in. But I think I need to say something before we go any farther in our discussion of friendship this morning. I think I need to say something about this relationship between David and Jonathan. And it's a shame that I have to say this, but in our world today, we are so hypersexualized in our world today that when we read these passages about David and Jonathan, so many people want to turn this into some kind of inappropriate homosexual relationship that existed between them. And I will tell you that is not at all what God wants us to take from this story. And it's a shame that I even have to say that. But that's just how warped and twisted our culture has become. We read about two men who share a deep, close love for each other, and that's the direction that our culture wants us to take it. And that is so ridiculous. David is one of the most righteous and godly people in all of the Bible, and yet somehow he's involved in an inappropriate relationship that the Scripture condemns from the earliest pages of the book? No. Come on. We know better than that, and we're not going to let the culture lie to us about this. But it is interesting that in our world, two men cannot be this close together without people making false and inappropriate assumptions. Isn't that sad? You know, can two men in our world say, "I love you" anymore? Without people turning it and twisting it and warping that into something that it shouldn't be? Listen, you all know me well enough to know I may have done this to you before, and if I did and it embarrassed you, I'm sorry. But some of you men, I've said to you before, "Hey, I love you." And you know what sometimes happens when I say that? I say, "Hey, brother, I love you." And sometimes I get this, huh. Or how about this one? "Hey, brother, I love you so much. I really love your family." "Oh, thanks." Right? You've been there before? I remember several years ago, I was having coffee with a preaching friend of mine. I'm not going to tell you his name because it doesn't matter, but he's become kind of an inner circle confidant for me. He's somebody that's on my board of preaching advisors, and when I have questions about things or I need some help, I need some advice, he's one of the guys that sometimes I'll go to. And we happened to be in the same town one week. I was preaching a meeting there, so we got coffee one day. And after having a really good conversation together, we ended our discussion, as we always do, with a prayer. And I'll never forget, he reached his hands across the table as if to say, "Take my hands, let's pray together." I had to think about that for a second. But you know what? Now we do it all the time, and I don't think in fact, I put my hands out first sometimes. Right? There's nothing inappropriate about that. But the kind of relationship that Jonathan and David had was a special kind of friendship. And what is it that made their friendship so strong? What made their bond so special? Well, that's what I want to think about with you this morning. And I am particularly talking to our young people this morning. All of us need good friends, no matter what age we are. But our young people especially need to know what true friendship looks like. They need to know that because the world is giving them messages that are not this message. The world is giving them messages about digital friendships and online platforms and social media interaction and followers and all of that. And listen, I'm not saying that all that stuff's terrible, though I think most of it is. But I'm not saying all that's terrible, okay? But what I am saying to you is that's not friendship. That's not real friendship. So what made the relationship between David and Jonathan so strong? I want to talk about four things with you very quickly this morning. Here's the first thing. The first thing that made their friendship so strong is that both of these men were serious about serving God. That's the first place that we have to start. So go with me back to chapter 14. Jonathan, by the time he comes onto the scene, Jonathan is a young adult. Jonathan is, in chapter 14, he is already a soldier in the Israelite army, and he knows that his skills are quite impressive. Jonathan is really good with a bow and arrow, the Bible's going to tell us. But Jonathan knows something more important than his skills as a soldier. Chapter 14 and verse 1, "The day came that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, 'Come and let us cross over to the Philistine garrison that is on the other side.' But Jonathan did not tell his father." Now Jonathan and his armor bearer are going to go up and fight against a garrison of Philistine troops. Just the two of them. And verse 14 is going to tell us that Jonathan killed 20 Philistines. Now that's pretty impressive for just a couple of guys to go up without any other help and kill 20 enemy combatants. But understand, Jonathan says this in verse 6. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised Philistines. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few." You see the faith of that statement? If God wants to help us, God will help us. And God is not restrained by the fact that there's only two of us. If God wants to give us victory, He's going to do that. Jonathan has faith in the Lord's help. Now go to chapter 17. This is the story you know. This is the story about only the little boy David and the babbling brook and the 5 smooth stones, and he put one in the sling and round. We remember that song? Chapter 17, David says in verse 45 to Goliath, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Both of these young men, independently of one another, they faced their battles knowing that God will be with them. These men had strong faith. Now, where did this faith come from? It's really hard to know the answer to that. Presumably, it came from their parents. But there's really very little said in the Bible about their parents, with the exception, of course, of King Saul, Jonathan's father. But what about Jonathan's mother? What about David's parents? There's really not much that's said at all. We're given their names, but really we're not given much more than that. But understand that Saul does not begin his precipitous spiritual decline until Jonathan is well into adulthood. So where did Jonathan get his great faith? Well, whatever the answer to that is, I want to say this to our young folks. You need to have strong friendships with other Christians. You need to promote Christian friendships. And what I'm saying to you with that is some of your best friends in life need to be your peers in this congregation, or maybe peers that you know from other congregations in other places where your family used to live, or other connections that you have. Your closest friends need to be Christian friends. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Hey, listen, preacher, that doesn't always work. I've tried to be friends with some of the kids I go to church with, and sometimes they're not the best kids. Listen, I know that better than anybody. I understand that. Stacy understands that. Sometimes we try to be friends with Christians who even go to church with us, but they're not what they should be. And so I understand when you say that doesn't always work. But I will tell you this, though sometimes kids from Christian homes are not the best influences and the best people for you to be friends with, then you go out and you find some who are. You find the ones in this church or in nearby congregations who are strong Christians, and you make friends with them. You want to build a true and serious friendship, a deep, meaningful friendship, it's going to start right here. You find somebody who's serious about serving the Lord. That's where it started with David and Jonathan. Now let's go to this second thing. I want you to see their friendship was so strong because each one of them pursued what was best for the other. Each one sought the good of the other. So go with me to chapter 18 now. 1 Samuel 18. We read verse 1 a moment ago. Jonathan and David are mentioned in verse 1, that their souls are knit together. Jonathan loved David as himself. Now let's keep reading. Saul took David that day and did not let him return to his father's house. David had become Saul's servant at this point, and Saul was very appreciative of what David did for him, and he said, hey, I want you to stay here all the time. David's not a prisoner, okay? That's not how we should understand verse 2. So Jonathan, verse 3, made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. Wow, look at that. Jonathan, who is a prince, right? He's the son of the king. He takes off the garments that have been given to him as the son of the king. He gives those to David. Wow, what a gift. What a gesture. He takes his armor that would have been most likely custom made for him as a prince in his father's army. He gives that to David. Now, if you keep going in verse 5, David went out wherever Saul sent him, and he prospered. And Saul set David over the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and in the sight of all of Saul's servants. David is doing well. He is prospering because the hand of the Lord is with him. But Jonathan is right there beside him, and he is even giving him his princely possessions. And he's doing that because he's honoring David. He does this because he loves David, and he wants to encourage and support David. Turn the page and go to chapter 20. Chapter 20 and verse 1. David says to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity? And what is my sin before your father that he is seeking to take my life?" Now, at this moment, Jonathan thinks that that's something that was in the past. David, listen, I talked to my dad, okay? He's cooled off now. Not a big deal anymore. He doesn't want to kill you anymore. And David says, yeah, I'm pretty sure he does. He's been throwing his spear at me and trying to kill me. I'm pretty sure he wants to kill me. And Jonathan says, as we continue reading, verse 2, "You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. So why would my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." And David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your sight." And he said, "Do not let Jonathan know this, or Jonathan, your dad is just hiding this from you. He wants to kill me, but he knows that we're best friends. And so he's not telling you about it. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is hardly a step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, verse 4, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David, whatever you want me to do, whatever I can do to help you, I will do it. So they come up with a plan, and they figure out a way to determine, is Saul still angry with David or not? So you drop down now in verse 9, Jonathan says, "If I should indeed learn that evil has been decided by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you about it?" David, if what you're saying is true, you know I will tell you. You know that I have your best interests at heart. And so David says in verse 10, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" Jonathan and David go out into the field, and they begin to work out their plan. Jonathan, of course, committing to help David. So now they're going to figure out, does Saul really want evil things for David? Jonathan is going to see for himself, after the plan that they've concocted works out, yes, Saul still wants to kill David. Now go to chapter 23. Moving ahead in the story, but chapter 23, if you look at verse 13, David and his men, about 600 of them, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. And when it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit. David stayed in the wilderness, in the strongholds, and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. Now David became aware that Saul had come out to seek his life. And Jonathan, verse 16, arose and went to David at Horesh, and he encouraged him in the Lord. I love that expression. Now there's no question at all that Saul still wants to kill David. He is chasing after him day after day. Jonathan has known this for a time now, and he comes out to David and he encourages David in the Lord. He gives David the words that he needs to keep his spirit lifted up and to keep his spirit refreshed. In verse 17, he said to David, "Do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you, and you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you, and Saul my father knows this." They enter into a covenant together, where Jonathan says to David, "I will do whatever I have to do to protect you from my father. I will not let anything bad happen to you." So in verse 18, the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went to his house. Each one, David and Jonathan, is pursuing the good of the other. Each one is looking out to be of help to the other. Now go back with me to chapter 20. I want to point out another covenant that was made, another promise that was made between these two. And I wanted to look at this one at this point because we see this covenant again when we come into the book of 2 Samuel. In chapter 20, if you look at verse 15, Jonathan says this to David, "You shall not cut off your loving kindness from my house forever, not even when the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord require it at the hands of David's enemies." And Jonathan made David vow again because of his love for him, because he loved him as he loved his own soul. "David, I want you and your house to make a covenant with me and my house, that your loving kindness toward the house of Jonathan will never die. That you will always do what is good for my family. That you'll always do what's good for my house." David and Jonathan made this oath to each other, that they would look out for each other in this way. Now go with me to 2 Samuel chapter 9. This is where David fulfills this covenant made to Jonathan. You see, Jonathan has a son. 2 Samuel chapter 9, we meet Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, who is a cripple because of an injury that happened to him when he was a child. And in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, David said, "Is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Do you see the language of the covenant that they made back in 1 Samuel 20? That Jonathan said to David, "Please show kindness to my house throughout all our generations." And David says, "I'm ready to do this. I want to show kindness to the house of Saul for the sake of Jonathan." Now in chapter 9 and verse 6, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David. He fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, "Mephibosheth," and he said, "Here is your servant." David said to him, "Do not fear. I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly." And Mephibosheth prostrated himself and said, "What is your servant that you should regard a dead dog like me?" King David, I am a worthless person in the grand scheme of your nation. Why are you doing this? I'm nothing more than a dead dog. And David says, "Not to me, you're not. To me, you are the son of my best friend, to whom I made a promise." And what I want us to see from this is that true friends want what is best for you. And they do whatever is best for you, even if it means that they do what's best for you to their own detriment. Even if it means that they have to sacrifice something themselves in order for you to do well. Jonathan does not do anything to deter David from being the man that God wants him to be. Jonathan not only doesn't deter him, but he encourages him, and he lifts up his spirits at times when David needed that, and he promotes good and godly things within David. Now I want to leave the books of Samuel and go to the book of Proverbs. Go with me to Proverbs chapter 1. I think it's interesting that when we come to the wisdom literature, you come to the book of Proverbs, a book about wisdom that we need for life. And Solomon is teaching in the book of Proverbs, he's teaching his children. And so he says in chapter 1 and verse 8, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." He's talking to his son here. What's the first thing he talks to his son about? Chapter 1 and verse 10, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us,' let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, even whole as those who go down to the pit. We will find all kinds of precious wealth. We will fill our houses with spoil. Throw in your lot with us, and we shall all have one purse. Now, I know we don't really talk like that, but young people, listen, what that means today in the 2025 Ben Walker Revised Standard Edition is this. Watch out for who you spend time with. There's going to be people in your life who will say that they are your friends, and they will encourage you to join them in all kinds of things that you ought not be doing. They are going to try to pull you into things that are ungodly, things that are wicked, things that are at best mischievous, and you need to stay away from those things. And Solomon says this is topic number 1 when he begins the book of Proverbs, writing and speaking to his son. Watch out who your friends are. Be wise in your choice of companions. Good friends promote good things. And if you find that the people in your life are promoting things that are making you question, that are making you doubt, that you have misgivings about, that you would feel shame about if you participated in, listen, those are not your friends. Because friends seek what is good for you. All right? Now here's another thing that we see in David and Jonathan, and that is that their friendship was not hindered in any way by jealousy. Their friendship was not hindered by jealousy. We'll not look at this one again, but we've already seen chapter 18 and verse 4 when Jonathan gave his royal clothes and armor to David. Jonathan knew that David was chosen by God to be the next king. And we need to understand the significance of this. If God had not chosen David to be the next king, who would have been the next king? Jonathan. He would have been next in line. And he understood that, and his father understood that. In chapter 20 and verse 30, Saul is angry with his son Jonathan. And he says, chapter 20 and verse 30, Saul's anger burned against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You are the son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Do I not know that you are choosing the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? Jonathan, you're choosing David over me and your mother, over your family. You're choosing your friend David over us. Don't you know that he is my enemy?" Now verse 31, Saul says, "For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he must surely die." Jonathan, if David is alive, you cannot be the king. Don't you see that? Don't you want to be the king? And so bring me your friend David so that I can kill him. Go to chapter 23 in verse 17. Jonathan says, chapter 23 and verse 17, we read this a moment ago. Jonathan says to David, "Do not be afraid, because the hand of Saul my father will not find you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. And my father Saul knows this also." Not only does my father know that you will be the next king, but he also knows that when you're king, I will be standing right beside you. I will be your right-hand man. I will be your number 2. I will support you in everything that you are doing, and my father knows this. Jonathan was willing to be next to David, not in front of David. When all the women of Israel sang to David that he has slain his tens of thousands while Saul has only slain his thousands, when the people of Israel were celebrating David's military accomplishment, Jonathan was an impressive soldier too. Why didn't they sing about Jonathan? Well, why aren't they celebrating my military exploits? I mean, after all, I killed 20 Philistines all by myself. He only killed 1. I mean, yeah, he was huge, but it was just 1. Why didn't they sing about me? Jonathan doesn't do that. You know, sometimes it's hard to play second fiddle. But Jonathan embraced that. And he did that because he was humble and because he accepted what he knew was the will of God. He knew his role and he accepted it. I'm thinking about this passage in Romans 12 and verse 15 that says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Now, I want to ask you something. Which of those is more difficult? You know, it's hard to weep with people who are weeping, right? Because they're sad and now I'm sad and we want to encourage, and that's hard to do. It's a heavy burden. It's hard to weep with those who are weeping. Listen, it is much harder to rejoice with people who are rejoicing. Don't you think? And when someone else is weeping and mourning, we know what that feels like. Well, I've lost loved ones before too, and I know what you're going through. I've dealt with this kind of disease before too, or I watched my parents deal with this disease. I mean, we can understand that a little bit better. But what about when Bob gets the promotion at work over me? What about when Gary was appointed one of the elders, but not me? What about when so-and-so gets a nice new car, but I'm still driving this old 81 Pinto? I don't even know if they made Pintos in 81. I just picked a number and a car. You see, I think it's much harder to rejoice with those who are rejoicing. Because ultimately, if I'm going to be able to do that, I have to empty myself of pride. I have to empty myself of envy and jealousy. But there's not a hint of that with Jonathan. I admire that in him. Young folks, if you ever feel like there's jealousy and tension in your relationships with your friends, maybe you have been successful in sports, or you've been successful in academics and they've not done quite as well as you have, and so they start to take little stabs at you to try to bring you back down. Listen, that is jealousy. That is envy within them. That is the devil working in their hearts through their pride. And if you sense that in your relationships with them, they're not your true friends. True friends rejoice when you rejoice. All right, here's the last thing I want us to see very quickly. And that is that this friendship that they had was deeply meaningful to both of them. And you say, well, yeah, preacher, we know that. That's the whole point you're making this morning. Yes, but I want us to think about this a little bit more. When David had heard of Saul and Jonathan's death, okay, so now let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 1. You see, they died in 1 Samuel 31, but now we go to 2 Samuel 1. David hears about the deaths of King Saul and Prince Jonathan. When he heard about this, he grieved over this. So chapter 1 and verse 11, David took hold of his clothes and he tore them, and so also did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David even laments, and he writes at the end of chapter 1, the second half of chapter 1, he writes a song of lamentation. And so in chapter 1 and in verse 17, David chanted with this lament over Saul and Jonathan, his son. And he told them to teach the sons of Judah this song. So in verse 19, he says, your beauty, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Included in the mighty who fell, of course, would be Saul and Jonathan. We continue reading, verse 22, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. These were brave soldiers. They weren't afraid in battle. They rushed into battle to fight with great valor. Verse 23, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They died together. Now, verse 23 describes their abilities and their war-fighting skills. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Isn't it interesting, to David's credit, he praises the man who tried to kill him for a long time. That says something about David's character, doesn't it? But then, verse 25, at the end of the verse, Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me, and your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. Can I go back to what I started with at the very beginning? Verse 26 is the verse that all the people who want to turn David and Jonathan's relationship into something inappropriate, this is the real sugar stick for them right here. Oh, you know, Jonathan's love is better than the love of women. And this is where they go to twist this relationship into something sordid and inappropriate. That is not what this is about. David is highlighting the faithfulness of Jonathan. He is talking about how Jonathan has been his closest companion for so many years, and that this was a relationship and a bond of strength and faithfulness. Now, there's a lot more things I could say about that, but I really need to finish this up. But I want to make this observation with you. When you lose a true friend, it hurts. Maybe you lose them because you've both gotten older and age and health have just taken them from you. That hurts. To lose a friend that you've known all of your life. But that's not David and Jonathan's situation. These are not two men who grew old together and they both died in their late 80s. Jonathan died still as an adult, but as a relatively young man, right? Jonathan is fighting battles when he dies. He's not on Social Security, okay? I know that 65 is the new 40. You know, I'm not saying you're old if you're on Social Security. You get my point. Jonathan's fighting in war when he dies. He's full of strength, and he has many years ahead of him. But David mourned greatly when he lost his friend. A shallow friend leaves your life, and yeah, it maybe hurts for a few days, maybe a week or two. But then you start mulling that over a little more, and you say, she was always kind of mean to me anyways. And yeah, she bought me a bag of chips at the vending machine one time, but then she ate half of them, and I just don't know that we were really all that close anyways, right? Those kinds of relationships, those just roll off you like water off a duck's back. But the true friendships are the ones that hurt the most when you don't have them anymore. Listen, this is going to be a surprise to you young people, I'm sure, but challenge me on this, okay? Ask your parents if this is true. Ask your grandparents if this has been their experience. You will be lucky if in your life, throughout all the years that you live, you will be lucky if you find 1, 2, at most 3 Jonathans. It's true. You may have 10,000 followers on social media. You may have thousands of friends on your social media. Those are not your true friends. Those are people who know who you are on a screen, but they are not your true friends. You will be fortunate if you have one true, if I can quote Anne of Green Gables, Anne with an E, one bosom buddy. You'll be lucky. It's rare to have what David and Jonathan had. So give true and serious thought to who your friends are. If you find that you have to constantly make excuses for your friends to justify their behavior towards you, they are not quality friends. If you find that you have to hide your friends' words or behavior from your parents, they're not your friends. If you find that they make you feel less than, they're not friends. At best, They might be a little more than acquaintances. At worst, they're people who are trying to use you and manipulate you to get something that they want selfishly. Be careful who your friends are. And when you're choosing friends, look for someone who can give you the kind of bond that Jonathan and David had together. Well, I appreciate your attention this morning. I want to wrap this up very quickly. Is there some need that you have this morning? Some need that you have in your spiritual life? You need to make your life right with God. We want to help you do that this morning. And if that means that you are beginning your walk with the Lord, or if you're returning to Him because you've been away from His service for some time, we want to, as Jonathan did to David, encourage you in the Lord. And we want you to do the right thing this morning. Can we help you with that? If we can, come to the front now as we stand and sing together.